I'd always thought I lived in a quiet, safe neighborhood, located in a town in rural Scotland. It wasn't anything crazy, just a few blocks of houses with neatly trimmed lawns, the occasional dog barking, and the hum of lawnmowers on weekends. But one night, everything changed, and that quiet, peaceful neighborhood became a place of fear. It started on a Thursday evening. I had just gotten home from work, and it was already getting dark. The streetlights flickered on as I pulled into my driveway. My house was small, but it was cozy, and it had been my haven for the past few years. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. I had just started to settle in when I heard it, a faint knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I stood frozen for a moment. The knock came again, a little louder this time. I didn't know who it could be, but something about it felt off. Cautiously, I walked over to the door and peeked through the peephole. There was no one there. Thinking it was some prank or just a neighbor passing by, I shrugged it off and went back to watching TV. But then, a few minutes later, I heard it again, this time from the window on the side of the house. A soft tapping sound, almost like fingers against the glass. I froze. It wasn't the wind. Someone was definitely outside. My heart raced as I moved to the window and slowly pulled back the curtain. The darkness outside swallowed everything, but I could make out a faint figure standing 10 meters away by the fence. I couldn't see their face, but the silhouette was tall and motionless. It sent a shiver down my spine. I pulled away from the window quickly, my breathing shallow. I couldn't tell if it was just some kid messing around or if it was something more serious. But what I knew for sure was that whoever it was, they weren't supposed to be there. I thought about calling the police, but part of me hesitated. What if I was overreacting? What if it was just someone who'd lost their way? I couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease, though. I grabbed my phone and dialed my best friend, hoping to calm my nerves. "Hello," she answered sleepily. "Hey, this is going to sound weird, but I think someone's outside my house," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean? Like someone's knocking?" "Yeah, but it's not just knocking," I explained. "I think they're standing outside my window." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's creepy. You should call the police. Don't take any chances." I agreed, but before I could, the sound of tapping came again, this time from my front door. It was unmistakable. Someone was out there. I hung up the phone and called the police. My hands were shaking as I tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher. After what felt like forever, she assured me help was on the way and advised me to stay inside, lock the doors, and not open the windows. I did as I was told, but it was hard to concentrate. Every small sound seemed to amplify in my mind. The wind rustling the trees, the hum of my refrigerator, the quiet thuds of footsteps. Were they coming closer? Was the person still outside? I stood by the window, peering through the blinds. The figure was still there, now standing perfectly still. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't dare make a sound or turn on any lights, hoping whoever it was wouldn't notice me watching. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. The longer I stood in the living room, the more I began to question everything. Had I seen someone at all? Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? But then a movement in the darkness caught my eye. The figure had moved. Slowly, it began to walk along the side of my house, toward the backyard. My blood ran cold. I moved away from the window, heart racing. There was no way this could be a coincidence. Someone was actively trying to get inside. I grabbed a flashlight and tucked it under my arm, just in case. I didn't know if I'd need to use it, but I wasn't going to sit there helpless. I was just about to head to the back door when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my neighbor, Mark. "Hey, just wanted to check in. Is everything okay?" It was odd. Mark was a good guy, but he usually didn't text me out of the blue. I replied quickly, hoping to ease my growing panic. "Yeah, just had a weird thing happen. Someone was just outside my house, and I think they're still here." I called the cops. The response was almost immediate. "Don't open the door. Stay inside. I just saw someone in your backyard." My heart stopped. That was it. I couldn't stay here anymore. I had to get out. My mind raced, trying to think of the best escape route. I grabbed my keys and headed for the back door, but as I reached for the handle, I froze. A shadow passed by the window. I wasn't alone anymore. The tapping sound came again, this time from the window right behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The fear hit me like a wave. My hands were trembling as I backed up against the door. I had no choice but to stay quiet and hope I hadn't been noticed. I could hear a man's voice now, soft and muffled, just beyond the walls. It felt like the walls themselves were closing in on me. Then, there was a loud thud at the front door. It sounded like someone had kicked it. I didn't move. I couldn't. I pressed my back against the door, breathing as quietly as possible. I could hear the man getting impatient. He banged on the door and jiggled the doorknob multiple times while talking to himself. He was swearing and telling himself that he has to do this. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of footsteps walking away. The man proceeded to circle the house 2 more times, making strange growling noises as he became more and more impatient. Soon, the creepy man left, and it was silent again. I didn't know how long I stayed there, but eventually, the police arrived, breaking the silence. They searched the house, the yard, and the surrounding area, but found nothing. The man outside, whoever it had been, was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just imagining it. Someone had been there, and they had been watching me. I moved away shortly after that night. I didn't feel safe there anymore. I had already been thinking about moving to Edinburgh for a few months before that incident. That incident was what caused me to leave that town. And to this day, I can't forget the figure that was standing outside my window. The tapping on the glass, the slow, deliberate movements, it all felt too crazy. Whoever he was, he escaped the scene before the police arrived, and he's probably still out there somewhere. I never thought much about the woods behind my family's house. I grew up with them, played in them as a kid, and even camped out there a few times with my friends. To me, they weren't just trees and dirt. But after what happened last summer, I can't even look out my back window without feeling nervous. It started when I decided to go on a solo camping trip. I had just finished my 2nd year of college and needed a break. My parents were out of town, and I figured a couple of nights in the woods would be peaceful. I packed my tent, some food, and a hunting knife, just in case. The first night was normal. I set up camp about a mile in, far enough to feel alone, but not so deep that I couldn't find my way back. I built a fire, roasted some hot dogs, and lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the stars. It was nice and quiet. Then, around midnight, I heard it, a rustling sound, not too far from my tent. The sound woke me up while I was sleeping. Probably just a raccoon or a deer, I told myself. But something about it made me uneasy. It wasn't random. It was slow, deliberate, like footsteps. I sat up, listening. The sound stopped. I held my breath, waiting, but there was nothing. Just the usual sounds of the forest. Eventually, I convinced myself I was being paranoid and went back to sleep. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. Just a few feet from my tent in the dirt were footprints, but they weren't mine. I told myself maybe another camper had passed through, but the prints led toward my tent, not away from it. Someone had been watching me. I decided to stay one more night. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I had made the footprints myself without realizing it, but still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That evening, I built my fire earlier than usual. I kept my knife close. I didn't listen to music like I had the night before. I wanted to hear everything. The woods felt different. The trees seemed closer, the air heavier. Every little sound put me on edge. Then as the sun dipped below the trees, I saw him. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, about 50 yards away from the fire I had set up, barely visible between the trees, was a man. He was standing completely still, facing my campsite. He had pale skin, greasy black hair that went past his shoulders, and a creepy smile on his face. He wore a strange-looking robe that was black with all of these strange red lines on it. And also, he was very tall. I would guess around 6'5". I called out, "Hey, who's there?" No answer. I stood up, gripping my knife. My heart pounded. The man didn't move. He just stood there, watching. I took a step forward. "Do you need something?" Still no response. I didn't know what to do. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. We stood like that for what felt like forever, until finally, slowly, he turned and walked back into the woods. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, clutching my knife, my back against my tent. Every rustle, every crack of a twig made me jump. I knew he was still out there. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my things and started heading back into town. I walked fast, constantly looking over my shoulder. The woods, which had always felt like a second home, now felt like a trap. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. On a tree, carved deep into the bark, were three words, "See you soon." The letters were large, and I would have noticed it when I had entered the forest. I saw that exact same tree when I began my camping trip. It had no writing on it, but now it was completely scratched all the way around from the ground up with the words, "See you soon," carved into it. Not only that, but some of the tree bark was also scratched off. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my house, locking every door and window behind me. I told my parents about the whole situation, and they told me that I should report it to the police. That's what I did. To my surprise, other people had reported the guy too. I haven't been in those woods since. Sometimes I wonder what that man wanted and why he was stalking people like that. I wonder if he is still out there. I grew up in a small town where nothing crazy ever happened. Everyone knew each other, and bad things only seemed to exist in movies or the news. But all of that changed the summer I turned 16. My parents had gone on a week-long trip to visit my aunt in another state. I stayed behind because I had a summer job at the local grocery store. I didn't mind being alone. I actually liked the quiet. Our house was a 2-story home with a basement that we rarely used. My dad stored old tools down there, and my mom kept a few boxes of decorations, but other than that, it was mostly empty. The basement door was in the kitchen, leading down a narrow set of wooden stairs. It always smelled damp, like dirt and mildew. I hated going down there, even in the daytime. The first night alone was fine. I watched some TV, played video games, and went to bed late. The second night, though, was when I noticed something strange. I had just finished dinner when I heard a sound, a faint creaking noise. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I heard it again. It was coming from the basement. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. It was probably nothing. Maybe the house settling, or a mouse. That's what I told myself. I walked over to the basement door and pressed my ear against it. Silence. I exhaled, shaking my head. I was just being paranoid. But later that night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again. A slow, deliberate creak. Then I heard the sound of footsteps. My body tensed. I held my breath, listening. Someone was down there. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, creeping down the hallway to the kitchen. The basement door was still shut, locked from the outside. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached for the knob and tested it. It was still locked. I knew where my dad kept the basement key, but I decided that I wanted to go back to bed. Before I went back upstairs, I stood there for a long time, waiting, but I heard nothing else. Eventually, I convinced myself I was just imagining things and went back to bed. The next day at work, I was distracted. I kept thinking about the noises. Had I really heard footsteps, or was it just my mind playing tricks on me? That night, I set up a plan. I placed a glass cup upside down on the doorknob of the basement door. If anyone tried to open it, the doorknob would jiggle and the cup would fall over and make a noise. I went to bed, but I barely slept. Every little sound made me nervous. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, crash. I got up in bed, my heart pounding. The cup. I grabbed my phone and ran to the kitchen. The cup was on the floor, shattered. The basement door was open. I stood there, frozen. There was no way it could have opened on its own. I took a step forward and aimed my phone's flashlight down the basement stairs. My hands shook as the light cut through the darkness. I saw nothing. No movement, no shadows, just the same basement. But then my stomach dropped. On the floor, right at the bottom of the stairs, was a single dirt footprint. I turned and ran. I locked myself in my room, shoved my dresser against the door, and called the police. When the police officers arrived, I unlocked the front door and told them everything. He entered the house and checked the basement with me. We went down together, my hands sweating as I gripped my phone. The footprint was still there, but there was no one in the basement. However, there was a sleeping bag, chips, and wrappers littered all over the floor. I also saw the deodorant stick that I had lost 3 weeks ago and several of my t-shirts. We searched every corner, every inch of space in the house, but the person who was living in the basement had disappeared without a trace. There were no broken windows, just a few dirty footprints, a sleeping bag, and the other household items in the basement. I found it hard to believe that a person had broken into the house and gotten into the basement. The basement door had always been locked, since my parents didn't want me going down there and knocking down the boxes. How long had the person been living down there? The answer will remain a mystery. Also, how did they escape so quickly after the glass cup broke? I ran downstairs to check out the scene as soon as the glass cup had shattered. To this day, none of it makes any sense at all. I didn't stay in the house that night. I packed a bag and stayed at my friend's place. Then I texted my parents what happened. I didn't clean up the mess that the person had left. My dad wanted to see the basement for himself. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I didn't do the glass cup experiment. How long would they have been able to live in the basement and steal food before my parents discovered them?